We are in the Torah portion of Eschanon, and now the class has begun. The class has begun.
I don't see any email here.
And the class has
Honestly, I
begun.
don't.
It would be, look around 120, but now I'm starting the class, so you could look at it, quietly.
No, I don't see it at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay, so we are in the Torah portion of the Eschanan, and during this Torah portion,
Okay.
Moshe
Never got it.
reviews the
Oh, there it is.
10 statements, and after, is it after or before? Right before. Somewhere, either before or after. It's before.
Is it right here?
Before he talks about the 10 statements, he talks about the event. And he asks the following. If you ask, do your research, ask people from earlier years that were before you. From the day that he created man on the earth. From one edge of the heavens to another edge of the heavens. Has there ever been anything like this great event, this great thing? Has anybody ever heard of anything like this? Hashama am kol Elokim, a nation heard the voice of God, medaber mitoch ha'esh, speaking from the midst of the fire, ka'asher shamata ata vayechi, like you heard and lived. O Hanisa Elokim lavola kachas o goy mikar of goy b'masot ba'osot ba'otot umoftim u'b'melchama b'yad chazakah v'zra netuya. Has God ever tried to take out a nation from another nation with signs and wonders and with battles, with a strong arm, with an outstretched arm, with such great visions, as God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? So you experienced something as a nation. You experienced something as a nation. This has never happened before. It's unprecedented. Unprecedented. And he identifies two events. The one is the Sinai event, and the other is leaving of Egypt. They happen close to each other, but they are two separate events. He identifies them as two separate events, and not the nature of the one has never happened before. The nature of the other has never happened before. No nation has ever seen anything like this. Ata horeisa ladas, you were shown this so that you will know. Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that the Lord is God. Ein od milvado, there is none other besides him. Min hashamayim ishmiacha es kolo liasrecha, from the heavens he made his voice heard to you. Bala aretz herecha, and on earth he showed you as isho hagadola, his great fire. Udvarav shamata mitoch ha'esh, and you heard his words from amidst the fire. V'tachas ki ohav es avosecha v'yivchar bezaro achra. Why? Why did he do this? Because he loved your fathers, and he chose your father's seed afterwards. And therefore he took you out from before him with his great strength from Egypt. Lahorish goim gedolim v'atzumim mimcha, in order to sort of move away or inherit away or conquer great nations who are greater than you, laviyacha latzeit lacha es artzam, in order to bring you, to give you their land, nachla keyom hazeh, an inheritance like this day. So they are standing, all the nation, when Moshe is talking to them, they're standing on the other side of the Jordan, preparing to go in. And this is kind of preparatory. This whole speech, all these speeches in Devarim are preparatory to them going into the land of Israel. And he's telling them that up until now, what you saw as a nation is unprecedented. He showed it to you, and he showed it to you via data, and you will know Hayom, and you will take it to your heart, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that the Lord is God, b'shamayim imal, in the heavens above, al ha'aretz mitachas, and on the earth below, ein od, there is no other God. And then he goes on to say, and you will keep the commandments which God is commanding us, so that it will be good for us and our children afterwards, so that we will have long days on the land which the Lord our God gave us. So this is, again, he's speaking to the people before they go in, and he's telling them what the people saw. So Rabbi David Gottlieb has a lecture. It began as one lecture, and it developed into a series of lectures. And that is proof of God, of God's relationship to the Jewish people, is the special relationship of the Jewish people, and proof of God's existence from the Torah. And so one of his proofs is from this, that it's one thing to have one person tell you that he spoke with God or that God did a miracle for him. And that happened many times throughout history. But to have an entire nation that makes this claim is impossible if it didn't happen. That's what he is suggesting. It's impossible if it didn't happen. Because how would it happen? At some stage, somebody's going to tell the people such and such happened. And the people are going to go, how did it happen? And he's going to tell them the story. And the story is that God presented himself to the entire Jewish people. And he's going to ask this other person who this person's talking to, how come you know about it, but we don't know about it? Now, if it happened to the entire Jewish people, shouldn't we all know about it? If he said there are stories from the Middle Ages of people who fought dragons, but there's never a story of somebody who fought a dragon in the middle of London. Because if he had fought a dragon in the middle of London, everybody would have known about it. And that would be the question. How come we don't know about it? So what you'll say is, all right, he's not going to talk about it right after. Let's say, again, let's assume a bad actor and he's trying to insert this story and it wasn't true, but how would he insert? So maybe he's a long time later, but they still would all ask the question, how do you know about it? And none of us know about this story. We are all descendants of those people. And so, this is sort of what when he's saying, ask from the earlier generations and those afterwards, has anybody ever had an instance like this? It won't be that anybody had it. It won't be that anybody had it. The only people that had it are you. And nobody's going to ever make this claim either that it happened, because it's not possible to insert this claim. Whenever you have these kind of proofs. There are people that spend lots of time trying to disprove them, and I'm sure there's lots of learned responses to this, but this was his one of his proofs from the Torah, and it's many others have used it since then. As part of this, though, it makes a claim, this claim that we saw that there is no other God. In other words, there was something about this event that made us the nature of God absolutely clear to us without doubt. And part of the nature of God is that there is none other besides him. Ein od milvado. There is no other besides him. And that's how it's typically understood. If you look at the commentaries, they will, that's how they explain it. That's how they translate it. That's how I explain it. Ein od milvado. But if you delve deeper into some slightly more mystical commentaries, you'll see that there's been a tradition for quite some time to interpret those words, ein od milvado, to mean there is nothing besides him. Not just there is no other God besides him, but that there is nothing besides God. One of the surprising things about the Torah is that the Torah doesn't spend much time talking about the nature of God. The Torah does talk about the relationship between God and the Jewish people, but it doesn't really talk much about the nature of God. It will say something like over here, it also says, you didn't see any image. There is no image. So you'll have something like that, but you don't really have a discussion about the nature of God. Where you see discussions about the nature of God are in works of later origin. The Rambam talks about it a great deal in his Guide for the Perplexed, and even in his codes, even in his commentary on the Mishnah a little bit, when he does the 13, what we call the 13 principles of faith. But the Tanakh doesn't really discuss the nature of God. And it's not something that the average Jew necessarily does a great job of discussing the nature of God as well. Although, if we had a conversation about it and people were asking questions, we can answer a lot of things about what God isn't. But when it comes to describing what God is, there's not a lot we can say about it. Now, some of this has to do with the fact that words are limited in their ability to convey matters beyond the physical. If we're talking about something beyond what we see and that is not subject to the laws of physics, it's very hard for us to do that, to characterize it, because our words don't do a good job of it. So part of the problem is that we don't have the tools to communicate much about this. The other problem is, and maybe they go hand in hand, is that we have limited understanding. our intellect is also limited by what it can grasp. There was a novella, either it's a novella or a long short story called Flatlands, which was written, I think, by a Swedish author. And it's a kind of mathematical story. It's a story about a world that was only two-dimensional. And at first, it's not so easy to enter this world. But after a while, he does a pretty good job. And after a while, you sort of go there. And you can imagine a world that is made up of squares and triangles and circles and things that are two-dimensional. And one day, as part of the developing story, there's a sphere that is lowered into their world. Now, they are two-dimensional. And so when they see the sphere, they see it as a two-dimensional object. They don't have a vessel. They don't have the ability to see or understand something that's three-dimensional because they're only two-dimensional. So they never really grasp more than what they can see, which is the two-dimensional nature of the two-dimensional representation of the sphere. So you could say that my brother-in-law, Larry Brown, wanted to suggest one time that this helps to explain the Rambam. The Rambam asked a question in his Laws of Repentance. He asked the question, if God knows the future, if he knows everything and he knows the future, how do we have free will? So this is one of the questions about free will. And he chooses to answer in his codes, he chooses to answer that our problem is we don't understand what it means. We say the words, but we don't understand what it means to say that he knows everything. We say the words, but we don't really understand the notion. And because of that, we have this problem. It's not that there isn't an answer to this question. There could be an answer to this question. The problem is that one of the pieces to the question is something that's beyond our grasp, to which the Ravid, Rabbi Avram ben David, whose glosses, whose critiques are in almost every edition of the Mishnah Torah, he says, if you don't have a good answer for the question, sometimes it's best not to ask it. Now, is why, what was the point of bringing this up if you don't have anything to say about it? So my brother-in-law, Larry, was suggesting that it's not that the Rambam was suggesting something like, and it's sort of important for us to recognize our limitations, something like that event described in Flatlands. That part, it's not just that we can't think of the words, we can't imagine. Just like a two-dimensional object can't imagine a three-dimensional object, we can't imagine it. And when you're asking questions about things that you can't imagine, right? You can say words, you can say all sorts of words. And maybe somebody from a three-dimensional world even told you words to use, but it doesn't, what does it do for you? It's words. So this is our problem when we're talking about God. And this could help to explain our problem with what we don't see. How is it we don't see God, right? Because we are two-dimensional beings encountering a three-dimensional, but keep it up, encountering a three-dimensional being. For most of life, we don't even get that, the encounter. For most of life, we have our own little moments, but we don't have what they have. That's part of what we're being told here, that this event at Sinai gave a glimpse to people of something that it seems to be rare. It seems to be something for sure that not a whole nation ever saw it one time, but it seems to be something that even your average human being, an experience even your average human being did not have. After the discussion of the, and in this one, by the way, it said twice that you heard God's voice talking from the fire. So there is something they saw. They did see fire, or they saw something that they describe as fire. That they did see. And it says that twice, that he spoke through the fire. In chapter 5, after the discussion of after he goes over the 10 statements again, it says, Es hadvarim ha'ela diber Hashem al kol kahalchem bahar. These words God spoke to your entire gathering at the mountain. Mitoch ha'esh, from amidst the fire. Another time he says amidst the fire. Ha'anan v'arafel kol gadol v'lo yasaf. There was clouds, kind of darkness. There was a voice that did not stop. Vayichtavim al shnei luchos avadim v'yitneim elav Eloi. And then he said he wrote them on tablets and gave them to me. Vayihi, and it was kishamachem es hakol mitoch hachoshech v'har boer ba'esh. When you heard God's voice from the darkness, and the mountain was aflame, v'tikruvin elai kol roshei shivteichem v'zignechem. So all your elders, the heads of your tribes, came close to me. Vatomru, and they said, Hein heranu Hashem Elokeinu es kvodo es godlo. God has shown us his glory and his greatness. Ves kolo shamanu mitoch ha'esh, and we heard his voice from a fire. Hayom hazeh ra'inu ki yedaber Elokim es adam v'chai. On this day we saw that God could speak with mankind and live, and mankind could live. V'ata lama namut. So why should we die? Ki tochlenu ha'esh hagdola hazot. This fire is going to consume us. Im yosvim anachnu lishmoa es kol Hashem Elokeinu od v'masnu. If we continue to hear this voice of the Lord God, we are going to die. Ki mi kol basar asher shama kol Elokim achayim midaber mitoch ha'esh kamon v'yechi. Who of flesh could hear the voice of the Lord God speaking from the fire like us and live? Krav ata, you go close to God, Ushma, and listen to what he has to say. Eis kol asher yomer Hashem, everything God has to say, Elokeinu, the Lord God has to say, Va'at tedaber eleinu, and then you'll speak to us. Eis kol asher yidaber Elokim Elokeinu elecha v'shamanu v'asinu. Everything that he says to do, we will hear and we will do. And then it says, V'yishma Hashem Elokim kol divrechem, and the Lord God heard the sound of your voice, your words. But daberchem elai, when you spoke to me, Vayomer Hashem elai, Shamati is called divrei ha'amazeh, and God said to me, I heard them. Asher divrei lecha heitivu kol asher dibelu. And do what they do. Do what they said. Step back. Do what they said. This is a version of the story that was told in Shemot. In Shemot, Moshe initially rebukes them and saying this is just a test, don't step back, but they step back. Here he says, just listen to them. Also, just as a side point, there's a Gemara in Shabbos, in Tractate Shabbos, that talks about the moment the Torah was what we call the Torah being given, when God spoke the 10 statements. And it says that God held a mountain. He held Sinai over the people, and he said, if you accept it, good. If you don't accept it, there's going to be your grave. In other words, he's going to drop the mountain on top of them. And Tosfos over there says that, Tosfos asked the question, what happened to Nasav and Nishma? Didn't the people originally say, we will hear and we will do? Why do the people have to be forced to keep the Torah? The Torah, it said, we will hear. They said, we will We will do and we will hear. That's what they said. We will do and we will hear. Nasa v'nishma. We will do and we will hear. So why do they have to be forced? So Tosfos says they were so frightened by what was going on over there, they went back on Nasa v'nishma. And people, there are all sorts of commentaries that were going, oh, where does Tosfos get this? And why would Tosfos say such a thing? And Rav Moshe Shapiro, blessed memory, says it comes from our verse. Our verse, which is in chapter 5, verse 24, they said, you speak to us everything that God said to you, and we will hear it and we will do it. They don't say we will do it and we will hear it. Now they say we will hear it and we will do it. They reverted back from we will do and we will hear. And now we will hear and we will do. So Tosfos is getting it from this verse, from our verse over here. That's how frightened they are. Everything they just, like everything they switch back to before their great moment when they said we will do and we will hear. Do you see how many times it talks about the fire? That's a lot of times. Don't you agree? It's almost every time he talks about speaking to them, it was from the fire. And we had it a couple of times in chapter 4. And then when he goes over it in chapter 5, it's once in verse 19, once in verse 20, once in verse 21, once in verse 22, once in verse 23, 5 times. 5 different times, 5 verses in a row. Every time he talks about speaking, we talk about speaking from the fire. So when Moshe, back in the Shemot version, when Moshe said, God's just testing you, he's just testing you. You could stay close, you're going to be okay. But the people can't. And they say it many times. They told him many times, it is a fire. It's a raging fire. His voice is coming from a raging fire. It's going to consume us. We cannot exist if this continues. So what do they see and what does Moshe see? They see a fire. Why doesn't Moshe see a fire? He doesn't say it's not a fire. In fact, he characterizes it as a fire. He himself characterized it. It was like a fire. So why doesn't he say it's not a fire? He doesn't. He seems to be agreeing with them that it looks like a fire. So then what does he mean that you're not going to be consumed by it? Humans are consumed by fires. How would Moshe know that the people are not going to be consumed by this fire? The answer is because Moshe already saw this fire. When we're told about Moshe's encounter with Hashem at Chorev, it says that the bush was aflame, but the fire did not consume the bush. So, and this was surprising to him, and he even wants to investigate. It says over there, he takes a look. He wants to investigate. He wants to see it. I have a theory. At one point, he's walking closer, and then God says, don't come any closer. I have a theory that if God hadn't said, don't come any closer, he would have gone right up to the fire and put his hand in it, just to see how is it that this fire is not consuming the bush. But at some point, God has to tell him not to come any closer. And just in general, you don't hear that too often, that God is telling people, don't come any closer. It's not like people are jumping to come too close to God, where he has to warn you, don't come any closer. But Moshe over there saw that, I'm suggesting he saw this fire. He saw the fire does not consume the bush. And he came away with an understanding about this fire, even though it looks like fire. It looked like fire to him too, exactly like fire. And this looks like fire. But what he's suggesting to the people is, and it may be that he's saying something like, I don't know why, but this is not going to consume you. I've seen this fire before. And this fire doesn't consume you. Well, the people are, it doesn't help that he says that. It doesn't change the experience. It seems to be all consuming. So I want to suggest that we all have this experience to some degree when we are getting close to God, or at least we're concerned about getting close to God to some degree because of the fire problem. The fire problem is what happens when fire consumes something that is a material object. It's the fire, by the time the fire is done, there's nothing left of the object. There's ashes. We think of ash. I don't technically know. Maybe you can test those ashes. Maybe there is some DNA of what was there before. But for all intents and purposes, whatever was there before is now gone. When fire burns something, the thing is over. And this is a concern that we have about getting too close to God. I'm going to say I have this concern, and I'm assuming others have it as well. That if you get too close to God, you are going to disappear. That disappearing can feel like dying. And in truth, something does disappear, but that thing that disappears is not us. And there is a voice that speaks as if it is us. There is a voice that it uses the word I. And I hear it, only I hear it. It's a voice in my head, and I hear it. And I think that that voice represents me. In other words, it's me speaking. It's me speaking. People have different names for this. Some people call it our thinking. Some people call it our monkey mind. And some people, they have all sorts of names for it. But this is the thoughts and words that are spoken in our heads, which we, for the most part, assume represents our person. And when I mean our person, I mean the deepest aspect of my being. That aspect which represents the core of who I am. So this voice will say things like, I am angry, or I am hungry, or I like pizza. And if you ask somebody like, who are you? Which I've done, and I've had classes where I started off the course asking them to write an essay answering the question, who are you? And people will tend to write things that come from that voice, or how that voice would characterize who they are. It's still not so easy, but it will come up with it. And we've talked about that voice, my I, or we'll call it my I with a little I. Maybe some people call it ego, or part, or something is sometimes associated with ego. But that voice, and the truth is, there's not just one. There's not just one. There's many of these voices, and none of them really entirely capture the essence of who I am, and they don't necessarily all speak on my behalf. There's a rule that a man has to voluntarily offer a divorce to a woman in a Jewish divorce. The man has to voluntarily offer the divorce. That's a rule, without exception. There's also a rule that if a man doesn't give a divorce, the court could hire somebody, if they want to beat the man up in order to get the man to the point where he wants to give the divorce, or at least threaten him or scare him or do other kinds of things that would get him to give the divorce. When he finally gives the divorce, he has to say, I want to give the divorce. But how is it that you're allowed to beat up a guy to give the divorce? So the Rambam says, because deep down he wants to give that divorce. Because deep down he wants to do the right thing. But his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, is getting in the way. And so all you're doing is subduing the Yetzer Hara. You're subduing the evil inclination so that his true feelings can emerge. This is just one example of the notion that that voice halachically, he's essentially saying that that voice that speaks on your behalf is not necessarily you. There's a you that's deeper, that's being represented by it. Rav Dessler even has a fascinating lecture or essay where he writes about how after the people ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the Yetzer Hara, which had been outside of the people, now became inside the people. So how is it inside the people, inside the person? What's the ramification of it? Because there's all sorts of things that you find yourself saying. I want a cheeseburger. I want to kill that person. These statements, which sound like they are me talking, are really the Yetzer Hara speaking in my voice. But it's not the depth of what I want. It's not the deepest reflection of who I am. These are just two examples in our own literature, and almost every culture that's thought about this has come to this conclusion. That there is a voice, a thought that represents itself as me, but it's not me. It's not really me. And meditation is one of the ways we separate between my deeper sense of I and those thoughts, to get to a point where I see them as just something that happens to me, but they're not me, they're not representative of me. And I say there's more than one voice, because when you see those thoughts, you're still seeing those thoughts, right? The part of you that's seeing those thoughts, and there's sometimes a part of you that makes judgment about your thinking self, which is funny, because you're thinking, and then you're, let's say, meditating, and then you notice that you're thinking, and then you go, oh, there I go thinking again. Now that vantage point that's sort of making fun of me thinking is also thinking. And you start to see that it's not so simple. A couple weeks ago, I decided that I used to give, up until maybe 2 months ago, I gave a Daf Yomi class at 5:30 in the morning. I did that for many years. For many years, I gave, maybe 20 years altogether, I gave classes at around that time every day. And then that class was sort of shrinking, and I had another Daf Yomi class that was at 8 o'clock. We combined the two classes, and now my Daf Yomi class is at either 7:15 or 7:30 in the morning. It's not Talmud, a study of Talmud every day. So it happens 6 days a week, and now it happens at either 7:15 or 7:30, 6 days a week. So I'm supposed to be exercising, and I belong to LA Fitness. Whenever I go, like, find time during the day, or one day I have time this time, one day I had time that time, and so I would go to LA Fitness on and off, and then it's just dawned on me that now I have this time, because they open at 5 in the morning. I'll go to LA Fitness at 5 and be there at 5 o'clock, and I'll be able to have uninterrupted time. There's no excuse. It's not going to be because of some scheduling during the day. There's uninterrupted time. So this is what I decide I'm going to do. So my first day, that means I have to get up, let's say, I don't know, 4:20. So at 4:20, and I was, by the way, for many years, I'm getting up not much later than that. to get up for the class, but I'm getting up. So the first morning I get up, it's 4:20, the alarm goes off. I look around me and it was like, are you an absolute idiot? Like, why would you think that you're going to be getting up every morning at this time to go? It was almost like my mind was scolding me for even thinking, there's no way. It is cold right now. It feels cold. I don't want to get up. And why should I get up? And what are the chances I'm going to be able to do this every day? Well, over there, I had people waiting for me. That was a motivation to get there. There's nobody noticing if I'm going or I'm not going now. There is no chance I'm going to be able, and this voice is just going, going, going. And then from somewhere deep inside, it made me laugh afterwards. From somewhere deep inside, I heard a voice, in my head, that just said, get up. It was just like that. It was like the adult in the room. An adult from deep inside just said, get up. And I just got up. And for days after that, I would laugh every time I thought of that voice, because it was really like that. Like I was being reprimanded by this voice. But that voice also, even though it was different than the chattering, whining voice that was saying, well, there's no way I'm going to get up, that is also not the deepest part of me. That's what I'm saying. You have layers of these voices. It's not just one, you noticed yourself chattering and that's the end of it. That and those, they are the things that don't want to disappear. They don't want to disappear. They are what disappears when you get closer to God. That starts because getting closer to God, everything's going to be silenced. As you're getting closer, it's all going to be quieted. You are not going to disappear. You, as Moshe saw it, you will not disappear. The essence, the essential things don't disappear. They don't burn away. The stuff that thinks it's you, that thinks it, and that does not want to go. It's the same thing with death. What part of you is afraid of death? The part of you that's afraid of death is those voices. Because the other aspect of you, the essential part of you, that was here before you were born, and that is going to be here after you die. That does not go away. The part that is nervous about going away is that same chattering voice that was going, what were you thinking when you came up with this idea? There is no way you're going to be, and it's just like going on and on. And that voice, the one that says, I hate this, or I hate this person, or and all the other things that voice says, that voice is, as you approach, as you go deeper, as you go closer to Hashem, that is going to disappear. Now, it can't entirely disappear while you're alive, because you need it to function. Because it serves an important function, which is that it organizes, it solves problems, it schedules your day, it makes plans, you need that. You need that to live. You need that to function. So while we're alive, we're going to have some modicum of it, but it's only here in its barest sense. It is not I. Not when we're getting close to God. It is not I. That's not you. That's not you speaking. As you get closer, suddenly somebody's pointing out. You're not hearing this at all. Then somebody's saying to you, that's your Yetzer Hara talking. And that's how you can tell you're starting to get closer. You're in the suburbs of God's, of God's existence. When somebody's starting to say, that's your Yetzer Hara talking. And you can't even tell the difference of what's going on, but at least, somebody's brought up the subject. But as you get closer, you move closer and closer to the palace. It's gonna, that voice is gonna put up the biggest struggle, because it wants to continue to exist. It thinks it's you. And if it disappearing is, in its mind, is death, and it's the source of the fear of death. It's and all sorts of other struggles that we have as we're trying to approach change, and even like you're so surprised the change.
I have to leave. What
Okay.
time tomorrow? What time tomorrow night?
I do not know, but I haven't looked at the email, but there is an email from DNG about it, but I don't know. I'm going to say it's later than that, but I don't want you to quote me, so I'm not going to say out loud.
I'll check my email.
There you go. Okay, yes. So not only is, by the way, not only is this voice inside of us, but this voice is outside of us, often spoken by our friends when we are trying to make a change in our lives for the better. Like, let's say you would decide that you're going to go on a diet, or let's say you have a drinking problem and you decide to stop drinking, or let's say you decide that you want to hang around with a different type of friend or something, and you start to hear your friends say things like, why don't you just have one piece of cake, when they know how hard it is for somebody to go on a diet and not eat the cake, and they're there, and this voice is somehow outside of me, and it's coming from some kind of similar place, this voice of my close friends, who I'm just astonished when it happens. Do you not love me? Do you not care about me? Do you not see that I am trying to stay alive? I'm trying to stay alive. This isn't just about something, but why are you offering me this cake? Why are you asking me to take this drink? Do you not realize that I'm trying to stay alive? Right? And this voice, because it doesn't want you to change. It does not want you to change. They're afraid. It's afraid. And your friends, it could be in the friends and loved ones. They're speaking it, but they're that same voice. They don't want you to change, because if you change, it's like you died in their mind. Because to them, you're drinking, you're eating, you're all these kinds of things. That's not you in your essence. And somebody who does become sober for 20 years and 30 years and 40 years figures that out, even though they couldn't believe it when they first did it, because they also thought that they will disappear if they have to do it. But somehow they saw that there's life. They are seeing something very similar to what Moshe saw when he saw the fire burning the bush, but the bush was not consumed. Or when Moshe is talking to the people and saying that you just stay closer. It's not going to, I can't explain how, it's not going to consume you. It's not going to consume you. You're experiencing it like it will, but it's not going to consume you, because that part, that voice, that is all screaming and afraid, that voice is not you. It's pretending to be you. It's not you. And when it's quiet, you're still going to be there. It'll be absolutely quiet and you're still there. Be well. Have a wonderful, meaningful Tisha B'Av. I say wonderful in the manner of wonder. May it be a matter of wonder, not that it be good. But anyways, you should have a meaningful Tisha B'Av and easy fast. And we should all merit the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash soon, and Mashiach coming soon. And that one day, very soon, Tisha B'Av will be a holiday, not a fast day. Be well.